Something cracked inside them at 4 a.m. Not with thunder or spectacle, no crashing glass, no slammed doors. It was quieter, more insidious. A hairline fracture spreading through the carefully constructed architecture of their inner world, the place they had spent years reinforcing against intrusion. This kind of break only reveals itself when everything else falls silent. When the city outside has dimmed and the last notifications have faded, leaving nothing between a person and their own unfiltered thoughts. At 4 a.m., the masks loosen. The ego, that relentless performer, grows exhausted from holding its pose all day. The defenses, those practiced shrugs, calculated silences, walls of sarcasm and detachment, stop working. They simply run out of energy. And in that unguarded stillness, you return. Not as a living body they could push away or argue with. You return as memory that won't be reasoned out of existence, as bodily sensation that tightens the throat and presses against the ribs, as an ache that feels almost muscular. You return as the persistent echo of every moment they tried to erase or rewrite. Yes, they crave you. Not the shallow craving they once dressed up as desire, possession, ego boost, temporary thrill. This is different. They crave you because you woke something inside them that cannot be forced back into dormancy. You touched a nerve they didn't know was still alive. Every word they spoke to you replays now with cruel precision. The flippant remarks meant to keep distance, the half-truths offered instead of honesty, the compliments laced with hesitation. Every word they withheld, the ones that burned on the tongue but never left the mouth, also returns. The unsaid apologies, the unvoiced admissions of need, the "I miss you" that pride strangled before it could form. Every time they pulled away just as closeness felt possible. Every performance of indifference when their pulse raced. Every cold shoulder raised the moment they felt exposed. All of it rushes back in the dark, because the dark offers no audience to perform for. In daylight, they can still maintain the narrative. They chose freedom. They protected themselves. They were strong. They fill the hours with work, social masks, casual flirtations, anything to keep the story intact. They tell themselves detachment is maturity, walking away is power. But the unconscious mind keeps no office hours. It waits patiently. And when the conscious sentry finally slumps, the shadow steps forward. The needy part they've spent decades disowning. The tender part they mock in others, but secretly long for. The frightened child inside who still believes love always ends in abandonment. These fragments, long banished to the basement of the psyche, climb the stairs at 4 a.m., especially the part that felt truly seen by you, not the curated version, not the charming surface, but the messy, contradictory, unfinished self. That recognition was both drug and danger. Exhilarating because it felt like home, terrifying because it demanded they drop the act. You mirrored them in a way no one else had. Not their highlight reel, not the persona polished for public approval. You reflected the hidden architecture, the doubts they never voiced, the wounds they pretended had healed, the longings they labeled weakness. When someone holds up that kind of mirror, the reaction is rarely calm acceptance. It is usually flight. Because seeing yourself clearly means the old excuses collapse. Loving you would have meant loving all of themselves, including the parts they had declared unlovable. That is why they ran. Why they shrank the enormity of what passed between you into something small and dismissible. Why they wrapped themselves in indifference like armor. Confronting themselves was more frightening than losing you. Most people will burn a rare connection to the ground rather than face their own unfinished business. But 4 a.m. refuses to cooperate with avoidance. In those hours, the mind loses its daytime filters. They replayed the exact look in your eyes when they were unraveling, the steady gaze that held space without judgment, your patience when they oscillated between pulling close and shoving away. The way you understood layers they hadn't explained, the way you never infantilized them, never treated their complexity as drama to be managed, but as soul to be met. You saw through every defense without making them feel small. You sensed when they were performing strength while quietly breaking. You named their contradictions softly, never as accusation, always as invitation to honesty. You witnessed their light, the creativity, the humor, the flashes of real goodness. And you witnessed their darkness, the avoidance, the projection, the self-sabotage. And you stayed. You didn't flinch. You didn't weaponize what you saw. That level of acceptance is more destabilizing than outright rejection. Rejection confirms old beliefs. See, I'm not safe, I'm not enough. But being fully seen and still chosen dismantles the entire defense system. If you could look at the worst and still want the whole, then the only thing left standing between them and real intimacy was their own fear. No more hiding behind wrong timing or they're too much. Just the naked truth. They were afraid. At 4 a.m., the weight descended. They felt viscerally what they had done. The ego-driven words meant to wound before being wounded. The silences deployed like punishments. The deliberate distance created to test whether you would chase. They saw how they projected their inner chaos onto you, accusing you of the very insecurities that lived inside them. And for the first time, the justifications rang false. Timing wasn't the villain. Circumstances weren't the culprit. You weren't the problem. They were looking straight at themselves. That crack in the foundation was identity itself beginning to shift. The version of them that hurt you cannot share the same house peacefully with the version now awake to the fact that you never deserved it. Something had to give. Pride cracked first, the arrogant conviction that they were always right. The myth of being the strong one fractured. The belief that walking away constituted victory crumbled into dust. They crave you now, not because options are scarce, not because nights are lonely, not because routine has dulled their senses. They crave you because you became the living proof that growth is possible. You disrupted the old loops that kept them numb. You forced the internal civil war between the part desperate for real closeness and the part convinced closeness equals death. At 4 a.m., the longing finally shouted louder than the fear. Your absence registered as something physical, a fist in the chest, limbs that wouldn't settle, mental replays of alternate endings where they had chosen courage instead of retreat. They remembered the texture of your energy, soft without being weak, steady without being rigid. Love that carried no drama, no manipulation, no frantic pace. Stability so consistent, it initially felt alien. A nervous system raised on chaos often mistakes calm for boredom, consistency for lack of passion, depth for intensity without fireworks. Now they see clearly. Surface intensity burns out. Ego-stroking attention evaporates. But the soul recognition you gave them
refuses to fade. Time did not erase you. It purified the memory until only the essential remained, sharp, undeniable. And in the privacy of those hours, they carry a shame they share with no one. Shame for fumbling something irreplaceable, for allowing fear to dictate terms, for staying strategically hidden while you stood courageously open. They understand now that your boundaries were never control. They were love in action. Your standards were never ultimatums. They were quiet invitations to rise, to show up fully, to take responsibility for their own heart. They weren't ready then. Readiness is frequently born in the aftermath of loss. When resistance finally exhausts itself, the psyche begins to knit itself back together. The crack is where integration starts. The splintered parts begin to speak to one another. The one that yearns for you, the one terrified of exposure,
the one that destroys what it wants, the one that aches for peace. You lit the conflict between who they have been and who they might still become. That kind of illumination cannot be switched off. They can delay it with distractions, drown it in new connections meant to prove they've moved on. But when the noise dies, at 4 a.m., at 3 a.m., at any unguarded hour, you are still there. Not as fixation, but as truth. They remember how you received their vulnerability without turning it into ammunition. How you met reactivity with calm rather than counterfire. How exceptionally rare that response is. Most encounters between defenses end in escalation. You brought awareness instead. And awareness is lethal to illusion. When you finally stepped back, not in bitterness, but in quiet self-regard, they tasted the absence of being deeply met. Surface conversations felt thin. Charm without depth felt hollow. The craving sharpened, not for touch or attention alone, but for the particular safety your presence once provided. The safety that let them lower their guard and simply exist. They miss who they became around you. Freer laughter, unguarded speech, hope they had long ago declared foolish. You brushed against the part of them that still believes meaning is possible. Pushing you away buried that believing part too. Its resurrection is painful. Growth frequently masquerades as grief. Grief for the self that must die. Grief for roads not taken. Grief for a shared horizon that almost materialized. What you brought wasn't standard issue connection. It was catalytic. It demanded surrender, of control, of old stories, of the illusion of safety through distance. They could not surrender then. But unfinished lessons have a way of returning until they are learned. The crack at 4 a.m. is not conclusion. It is commencement. The start of accountability, of seeing clearly, of old fortifications beginning to fall. You may witness none of it yet. Silence may continue. But an irreversible process has begun. Once the psyche has glimpsed necessary truth, uncomfortable, inconvenient, but essential, it cannot fully return to blindness. You were that truth to them. They crave you because you embody integration, wholeness, the possibility of love conducted without pretense or strategy. That vision frightens because it requires maturity.
healing old wounds, honest confrontation, genuine apology, real change. Yet hear this, dear one. Their awakening does not conscript your waiting. Their realization does not require your suspended life. You are not their shadow guide. You gave what was yours to give by remaining authentic. Whether or not they rise to meet that authenticity belongs to their journey alone. But yes, something cracked at 4 a.m. Through the fracture, light entered. Truth slipped inside. They felt you again. And this time, rather than resist, they let themselves miss you. Deeply, honestly. Ego stripped away. There, in that unguarded missing, transformation quietly begins.